The sound that pierced the murmur of the 18th birthday party wasn't the pop of champagne, but the guttural rumble of a German six-cylinder engine. Every guest in the impeccably manicured garden of the Iglesias home turned. There, parked in the driveway with a giant red bow on its hood, was a gleaming black BMW 4 Series, shimmering under the twilight lights. Caleb Iglesias, the golden child, the athlete, the family's social heir, had his mouth agape in a theatrical O of ecstasy. His parents, beaming, handed him the key. "Happy birthday, champ," his father said, clapping his son proudly on the back. His mother embraced him, tears of happiness streaming down her perfectly made-up face. "You deserve it, my son. The best of everything." The crowd applauded. Caleb's friends hoisted him onto their shoulders. It was a margarine commercial scene, a perfect portrait of the successful suburban family. On the other side of the lawn, near a rose bush that needed pruning, stood Yael, Thomas. It was his 18th birthday, too. They were twins. Not identical, of course. They were different in every way that mattered to their parents. As Caleb received the keys to a $70,000 car, Yael's mother approached him, almost as an afterthought. She carried a small package wrapped in plain brown paper. "Here, dear. Happy birthday." Her voice was more restrained, her smile less bright. Yael opened the gift. Inside, there was a book, an old book, with a worn leather cover. Its pages yellowed with time. There was no title on the spine. It was an old diary, or a ledger perhaps. "It belonged to your great-grandfather," his mother explained. "He liked things like this. We thought it was more your style. Something quiet." The phrase hung in the air, laden with subtext. Asterisk. Something quiet. Like you. Something that doesn't draw attention. That doesn't embarrass us. Yael Thomas was only 18, but he was already fluent in the language of omissions and unspoken meanings. He was autistic. To his parents, this was synonymous with broken, a project that never quite worked out, a puzzle with missing pieces. He looked from the worn book cover to the metallic gleam of the BMW. The contrast wasn't just about monetary value. It was a statement, a sentence. Caleb was the family's bright future. Yael was a dusty relic, stored in the attic. He didn't react. He didn't shout. He didn't cry. He simply nodded, with a calm their parents always mistook for apathy. "Thank you," he said, his voice monotone. Inside, however, a gear that had been slowly turning for years finally clicked into place. The decision was instant, cold, and absolute. He had already suspected something like this would happen. The signs were everywhere, small wounds he collected in secret. A quick flashback sharp as a shard of glass. At 10, Caleb had received a state-of-the-art bicycle for getting a B in math. Yael, who had won the state science Olympiad, got a pat on the head and a "very good, keep it up." Another memory, a family gathering, an aunt loudly asking if he was getting any more normal, while his parents smiled awkwardly and changed the subject. The worst, the time he overheard his father on the phone with a friend saying, "It's hard, you know, having one who's everything you dreamed of and the other, well, Yael is Yael." Each of those words was a brick in the wall, separating him from his own family. The car and the book weren't gifts. They were the final bricks, cementing the wall forever. As the party continued, with Caleb taking his envious friends for test drives in the new car, Yael went up to his room. He watched the scene from the window, not with resentment, but with the detachment of a scientist observing an experiment reach its inevitable conclusion. They underestimated him. They always had. They saw his quietness as weakness, his intense focus as a quirk, his social difficulties as a deficit. They never saw the mind working behind the calm eyes, a mind that saw patterns where others saw chaos, a mind that was, at that very moment, planning an escape. He waited. He waited for the party lights to dim, waited for Caleb's rumble in the next room, waited for his parents' hushed murmurs to cease downstairs. At 2 in the morning, with a backpack containing only a few changes of clothes, his laptop and the old book, Yael Thomas crept downstairs. He left a note on the kitchen table. It wasn't an angry or emotional letter. It was just 3 words. "I got the message." He walked into the cold night towards the nearest bus stop. As he sat on the icy plastic bench, under the orange glow of a lamppost, He opened the book. The handwriting was old, almost illegible, but Yael had always been good with patterns and codes. He traced his fingers over the pages. His parents had given him that book as a symbol of his insignificance, a discard. Little did they know that in doing so, they had made the biggest mistake of their lives. That book wasn't a full stop, it was a treasure map. While everyone mocked his pathetic gift, his eyes revealed a serenity that only comes to those who have faced far worse storms and survived to tell the tale. There, under the solitary light of a street lamp, Yael wasn't a runaway kid. He was a strategist initiating his first move in a game his family didn't even know they were playing. If this story of familial betrayal and veiled prejudice has left you indignant, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. You need to find out how an old book and a midnight escape became the catalyst for a turnaround that would shake the foundations of that perfect family to its core. City life was a sensory assault. For Yael Thomas, who processed the world with an intensity most people couldn't comprehend, the first few weeks were brutal. The traffic noise was a physical cacophony. The neon sign lights pierced his eyes, and the smell of street food, pollution, and thousands of people blended into an overwhelming olfactory soup. He rented a tiny room in the back of a noisy boarding house, its only luxury an unstable internet connection. With the little money he had saved, he survived. He got a job washing dishes in the kitchen of a bustling restaurant, a hellish environment of steam, shouting, and the incessant clatter of metal against ceramic. It was exhausting, but it had one advantage. The chaos was so immense it became white noise, allowing him to retreat into his own mind. Meanwhile, his phone buzzed incessantly. It was his parents and his brother Caleb. The early messages were irate. "Where are you? Your mother is worried. Stop this drama and come home," read his father's text. Then came the condescension. "Yael, this isn't funny. You've made your point. Now come back before you get into real trouble." Yael didn't reply, but he read each one, saving them in a secure folder on his laptop. He also listened to the voicemails, archiving the audio files. His mother's voice, tearful and manipulative. "How could you do this to us after everything we've done for you?" Caleb's voice, on the other hand, was pure scorn. In one of the messages, he laughed. "Dude, what's your problem? Enjoying the homeless life? By the way, the BMW is incredible, you have no idea. Girls love it. Too bad you're not here to see it." Each message, each mocking word, was more fuel for the cold furnace burning within him. They weren't concerned for his well-being. They were annoyed by the inconvenience, by the blemish on their perfect family image. They saw him as a stubborn pet who had escaped the yard, not as a human being who had reached his breaking point. They underestimated his capacity for survival, just as they had underestimated his intelligence his entire life. What they didn't know was that the restaurant kitchen's inferno was merely his day job. At night, in his cramped room, Yael delved into the only gift that mattered, his great-grandfather's book. He wasn't an ordinary man. He was a visionary engineer and investor, a man who, in the early days of the digital age, saw the future. The diary wasn't just a record of his thoughts, it was a manual, written in a mix of technical notes, philosophical reflections, and a complex system of ciphers he had created himself. To his parents, it was the scribbling of an eccentric old man. To Yael, with his mind attuned to deciphering patterns, it was a symphony. He spent hours at the public library, using its most powerful computers to research obscure concepts mentioned in the diary, cross-referencing, testing algorithms. Yael's resilience wasn't born that night of escape. It had been forged in years of self-imposed isolation, of finding refuge in worlds of logic and data, where rules made sense and unpredictable human emotions couldn't hurt him. His motivation wasn't just revenge, not in the petty sense of the word. It was a deep-seated need to prove his worth, not to them, but to himself. It was about rewriting the narrative that had been imposed on him since birth, that he was the other, the lesser, the one who needed fixing. One night, after 3 weeks of almost non-stop work, he found it. Hidden within a seemingly nonsensical sonnet about stars and gears was a cryptographic key. He entered it into a software he had written. The screen flickered, and then a line of text appeared. Access to an old cryptocurrency wallet, created in the early 2000s. The value wasn't astronomical, the equivalent of about $30,000. But to Yael, it was more than his brother's BMW. It was seed capital. It was freedom. It was proof. His great-grandfather hadn't just left him a book. He had left him a seed and instructions on how to plant it. That same night, Yael heard the last voicemail he would receive from Caleb for a long time. "Seriously, man, give it up. Dad's thinking of canceling your health insurance card. Come home, apologize, and maybe we'll forget this whole charade." Yael smiled. A genuine, rare smile. He turned off his phone, removed the SIM card, and snapped it in half. They thought they were cutting off his last lifeline. Little did they know he was already building his own network. Every new humiliation only strengthened something within him that his oppressors couldn't see. A silent force fueled by the very injustice they tried to impose. The game had leveled up, and while the Iglesias family continued playing checkers, Yael Thomas was already setting up his chessboard, ready for a long, meticulously planned game. With his great-grandfather's $30,000, Yael's first move was to truly disappear. He created a new digital identity, paid for 6 months' rent in advance in a small studio apartment, a monumental upgrade from his boarding house room, and invested in a high-performance computer. The dishwashing job was abandoned without notice. The era of survival was over. The era of construction had begun. Yael knew his mind was his greatest asset, and his hyperfixation on system security and cryptography, once seen as a strange peculiarity, would be his primary tool. He founded a one-person company, Cipher Security. The name was a tribute to the book that changed his life. He started small, offering his services on freelance platforms, performing security audits for small businesses and startups that couldn't afford the big cybersecurity corporations. His work was impeccable. He saw vulnerabilities in code like a musician hears a sour note. His online reputation began to grow. His clients didn't know his age or his story. They only knew the quality of his work and his laconic professionalism. But Yael realized he needed more than just technical skill. For what he planned, he needed a legal foundation. And that's how he found Elena Ivanov. Elena was a lawyer in her 40s, specializing in intellectual property and digital law. She had a small office, but a fierce reputation. Yael chose her after researching dozens of lawyers, drawn to an article she wrote about protecting inherited digital assets. He scheduled a consultation. When he walked into Elena's office, she saw a thin young man who avoided eye contact and spoke in short, precise sentences. Many would have dismissed him as insecure or immature, but Elena, a woman who built her career by reading people and situations, saw something else. She saw a focused intensity, an intelligence that burned beneath the quiet surface. Yael didn't tell his story emotively. He presented it as a case. He placed his laptop on the desk and showed her everything: the digital copies of his great-grandfather's diary, his decoding of the ciphers, the trail of the cryptocurrency wallet, and finally the folder he had titled Iglesias Archive. Inside were all the text messages, the voicemails, audio files, and even spreadsheets he had created, comparing his parents' spending on him and Caleb over the years. A cold, brutal documentation of the disparity. Elena Ivanov listened in silence, her face impassive. When he finished, she leaned forward. "What do you want, Yael?" "I want to legitimize everything I inherited from my great-grandfather, irrefutably," he said. "And I want to be prepared." "Prepared for what?" "For when they find me. Because they will. And when they do, I don't want them to have any power over me." Elena smiled. This was the kind of case she loved. A David with a supercomputer brain against a complacent Goliath. "Consider me hired," she said. As Yael built his fortress, the Iglesias family lived in their bubble of oblivious privilege. Occasionally they tried to find him, but superficially, they hired a cheap private investigator who found nothing. To them, Yael was a problem that, if ignored long enough, would resolve itself. Caleb, now in college, posted incessantly on social media. Parties, trips, the BMW front and center. In a caption for a photo at a ski resort, he wrote, "Work hard, play harder. Some never learn." His parents commented with hearts and proud emojis. They even had their family lawyer, a pompous man named Pierre Karimi, send a letter to Yael's last known address, the boarding house. The letter was a jumble of condescension, speaking of concerns for his mental state, and offering help if he came to his senses. The letter was returned to sender. Yael's small victories began to accumulate. A satisfied client recommended him to a medium-sized company. The contract he landed gave him financial stability for the entire year. He hired his first employee, a talented programmer named Shimon Doe, who admired Yael purely for his skills, unbothered by his social quirks. Cybersecurity was becoming a real entity. In one of their meetings, Elena Ivanov reviewed the legal structure she had created to protect Yael and his assets. "They can't touch you," she stated. "Legally, you're a fortress. But emotionally," Yael looked out of Elena's office window, which overlooked the park. "They think I was given a useless book to get rid of me. They think I ran away because I was hurt." He turned to her, and for the first time, Elena saw a chilling glint in his eyes. "They don't understand. I didn't run away. I was strategically relocated." For a moment, as Yael accepted that old book without protest, everyone at the party thought they were witnessing just another predictable failure, another different person being put in their place. What they didn't know is that they weren't giving him a consolation prize. They were giving him ammunition, and Yael Thomas was a patient marksman, waiting for the perfect moment to fire his first and only shot. That moment was drawing ever closer. The stage for the grand reveal was set by the Iglesias family themselves. Caleb's 21st birthday was approaching, and his parents, eager to reassert their social standing and celebrate their golden son, decided to throw an extravagant party. They rented the local country club's banquet hall, hired a band, and sent out invitations to the city's entire elite. The party was the talk of the town, a spectacle of opulence and familial pride. It was the perfect opportunity. Yael, who now monitored his family's online activities through means only he understood, knew every detail of the planning. A week before the party, the first shot was fired. It wasn't a loud shot, but a silent, precise projectile. Pierre Karimi, the Iglesias family's lawyer, received an email from Elena Ivanov. Attached was a 200-page legal document, a notice of lawsuit. Karimi's face, normally rosy and smug, turned pale as he read the first few pages. He immediately called Yael's father. The call interrupted a wine tasting for the party. "We have a problem," Karimi said, his voice strained. "A very big problem. Yael is suing us." There was a pause, and then Yael's father laughed. "Suing for what? For having hurt feelings?" The kids completely lost it. The arrogance was palpable. "No," Karimi said, his voice cutting through the air. "He's suing for his grandfather's inheritance. He's alleging trust mismanagement, embezzlement, and discrimination based on disability." Mr. Iglesias's laughter ceased. "What trust? The old man didn't leave anything besides that house and a bunch of junk." "Apparently he did," Karimi continued, flipping through the lawsuit's attachments. "And my God, he has proof. Documents, bank statements. He has transcripts of voicemails, screenshots of Caleb's post. He has everything." Panic began to set in. The party, which was meant to be the apex of the family's social triumph, now loomed under a dark cloud. They tried to quash the case, but Elena Ivanov was faster. She leaked an anonymous, summarized version of the lawsuit to a local gossip blogger, who published the story on the eve of the party. The headline was explosive. "Country club scandal. Prominent family accused of skimming inheritance from special needs. Son to spoil the sea." Other. The bomb detonated. The complete clever turnaround was executed not with dramatic confrontation, but with the cold, relentless logic of the law. The lawsuit detailed how Yael's great-grandfather, distrustful of his future sons-in-law and daughters-in-law, had created a secret trust fund for his great-grandchildren. Yael's parents were the trustees, obligated to administer and divide the funds equally when the twins turned 18. The old book wasn't just a diary. Within its leather cover, in a hidden compartment Yael discovered with the help of a rare book specialist, was the original will and the trust documents. His parents, in their ignorance and disdain, had never bothered to inspect the old man's junk. They simply took the annual dividends from the fund, which they believed were part of the general inheritance, and funneled them to Caleb. The BMW, the private college tuition, the ski trips, all had been paid for with money that largely belonged to Yael. The lawsuit sought not only Yael's half of the trust, but also the return of all misappropriated funds with compound interest, plus damages for emotional distress. The execution was surgical. Elena filed a motion to freeze the Iglesias family's assets until a full audit could be conducted. The news spread like wildfire. On the night of the party, the country club ballroom was half empty. Those who attended did so out of morbid curiosity, whispering in corners. The band played to an awkward silence. Caleb, his face flushed with rage and humiliation, watched his world crumble. His friends looked at him with a mix of pity and contempt. His parents tried to maintain appearances, forcing smiles, but their eyes betrayed their panic. The masterstroke, however, was the final piece of proof Yael had saved for the climax. The lawsuit included a final exhibit, a video. It was footage from a security camera Yael had discovered in his great-grandfather's digital archives. The camera was hidden in a grandfather clock in the old man's study. The recording, dated a few months after the great-grandfather's death, showed Yael's parents discovering the trust documents. "No one needs to know about this," the father said in the recording, tucking the papers into a folder. "We'll use this to give Caleb the opportunities he deserves. Yael, he wouldn't know what to do with this much money. It would be a burden to him." The mother agreed, saying, "It's for his own good. We're protecting him." The revelation of that video destroyed any defense they might have had. It wasn't a mistake. It was a deliberate fraud, justified by their own prejudice against their son. Yael wasn't at the party. He was in his office, on a video call with Elena. He watched his family's downfall not with glee, but with a resounding calm. He acted not out of cruelty. He acted out of justice. He didn't want to destroy them. He merely wanted to remove the power they held over him and reclaim what was rightfully his. The foundation of their perfect life, built on lies and favoritism, had collapsed, and all it took was a son they discarded and a book they despised. As the masks fell at the country club, one question hung in the air. Could bridges be built over such deep chasms of prejudice and privilege? For the Iglesias family, the answer seemed to be a resounding no. Justice for Yael wasn't loud. It was the sound of an empire of lies crumbling in silence. The resolution of the case was swift and brutal. For the Iglesias family, faced with the video evidence and irrefutable documentation, their lawyer, Pierre Karimi, advised them to settle to avoid a public trial that would annihilate them completely. The settlement was devastating for them. They were forced to liquidate a significant portion of their assets, including selling the house where Yael grew up, to pay him his full share of the inheritance, the misappropriated funds with compound interest, and substantial damages. Yael Thomas, the boy, who ran away with a backpack and an old book, was now a financially independent and successful man. But the money was merely a byproduct. The true triumph was freedom. He invested the majority of his inheritance into his company, Cipher Security. With capital to expand, he hired the best talent, including other neurodivergent professionals who, like him, were brilliant, but often overlooked by the traditional job market. Cipher Security became an innovative force in the cybersecurity industry, known for its creative approach and for staying one step ahead of digital threats. Yael, the quiet CEO, was respected not for his charisma, but for his genius and integrity. He rarely spoke in meetings, but when he did, everyone listened. He also fulfilled a promise to himself and his great-grandfather. With a portion of the funds, he established the Cipher Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to providing scholarships and mentorship to young people on the autism spectrum who wished to pursue careers in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Elena Ivanov, who became a trusted friend and advisor, served on the foundation's board. The antagonists' fate was a direct consequence of their own actions. The public humiliation and financial ruin broke Mr. and Mrs. Iglesias. They moved into a small apartment. The luxury and social status they so valued evaporated. Their friends from high society abandoned them. Isolated and bitter, they finally tried to contact Yael, sending emails filled with belated apologies and self-pity. Yael read them, archived them in the same folder where he kept the old messages, and never replied. Silence was his final answer. Caleb suffered the most, as his entire identity had been built upon the pedestal of privilege his parents had created for him. The BMW was repossessed, the college funds dried up, and he was forced to drop out. Without a degree and without the work ethic he never needed to develop, he struggled to hold down. entry-level jobs. The arrogance that defined him was replaced by corrosive resentment. He blamed Yael for everything, unable to see that he was merely the beneficiary of an injustice that, once corrected, left him with nothing of his own to sustain him. The supporting characters from Yael's old life served as a Greek chorus, validating his moral triumph. Old acquaintances of the family, who once looked at him with pity, now spoke of him with a mixture of admiration and awe. The story of the Yael, autistic kid who outsmarted his family, became a local legend of sorts, a lesson in never underestimating the quiet ones. On a sunny day, a year after the settlement, Yael stood on the rooftop of Cipher Security's new office building, looking out at the city. Simon Doe, his first employee and now head of development, joined him. "Thinking about anything, boss?" he asked. Yael watched the skyline for a moment before answering. "I was thinking about a book, an old book." He realized the greatest. Revenge wasn't his family's ruin. It was his own construction. They had defined him by his supposed limitations, but it was those very traits, his intense focus, his unique perspective, his ability to see hidden patterns, that became the foundation of his success. They had given him a book they considered trash, and he used it to build an empire. The moral was clear and powerful. A person's value is not determined by others' perceptions, but by their own resilience and intellect. The best revenge is not to stoop to the level of those who hurt you, but to rise above them in such a way that they become an irrelevant footnote in your success story. They tried to destroy Yael, but they ended up destroying themselves. Yael learned that true revenge isn't about reciprocating the harm suffered. It's about achieving the success your enemies could never imagine. And you, what would you have done in Yael's place? Let us know in the comments if you've ever felt underestimated and how you used that to strengthen yourself. If stories of clever justice like this inspire you, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because karma doesn't always act alone. Sometimes, it needs a brilliant plan to hit the target.